Rajdeep, congratulations on your book.
Thank you very much.
This is the first book I think I've seen where the author's name is bigger than the title. What does that say about you?
That you've got to ask that to the publishers. The cover of the book is entirely the decision of the publishers. So you've got to ask the publishers about that. That's not my call. My call is writing a book.
Okay.
I gave it to the publishers without any cover.
And in fact, your publishers should be called to book because I found at least 3 typos.
Okay. There must be more. There are a couple of typos, I think, and we've corrected a couple of them already.
Surprising, since it was Penguin, one doesn't expect it from them.
There are, I think, 2 typos.
Farmers, F-A-R-R, and the date.
Yeah, that's right. The date we've corrected.
Yeah. So, throughout your book, Rajdeep, I find that very often you bring in a cricketing analogy. Mm-hmm. It's in your blood. How, I mean, do you...
Well, just in a couple of places.
Couple of places.
Just in a couple of places, in a 350...
Four, 5 places, which is unusual to bring cricket into politics. If this was a one-day match, this would be this.
That's right.
If this was, in this kind of a situation, the captain would have been dropped.
That's right.
After the...
That's right. I mean, I've always believed that cricket is one of the great Indian obsessions. And I've grown up in a cricketing family. So there are cricketing analogies. There are a couple. I think they're all valid. I do believe that that counting day in elections is increasingly like a T20 match. It gets over in an hour, hour and a half, where 20 years ago it was like a 5-day test match. The other place I think where I use the analogy is what you said, that you have a captain, selector, manager, which I use in the context of the Gandhis, that they decide everything. They're the captains, they're the selectors, so who is to be dropped and who's to be kept in the Congress party is a decision that is solely left to the Gandhis. There is nobody else.
Yeah, so like the joke that came out that Sonia Gandhi tendered her resignation to herself, who then rejected it and said, no, I want you to stay.
Well, it's a bit like that. It's a bit like that.
Many areas in your book you've pointed out, and I've experienced it myself, pre-election with the Rahul Gandhi team, that a lot of it was off the record. You'd go there, I experienced this myself, expecting some information or to run up to an interview, which never happened. And then suddenly, when you're leaving, they say, oh, this is off the record. Why do you think this is happening? What is the psychology that you read into that team? Why did they do this? How did they manage it or mismanage it?
I think it was, a lack of experience. I think if you look at Team Rahul and you contrast it to Team Modi, I think certainly Team Rahul lacked the experience of understanding how the modern media machine works. So they were trying to do, in a sense, a little bit of old style politics, keeping it sort of very, very closed behind, not willing to share information. We are in the information age. And
ironically, they were younger than his team.
They were younger, but look, Rahul is not on Twitter and Facebook. He's not on, when I asked them why he wasn't, the reason I was given was that he likes to be in direct communication. And he can't be in direct communication on Twitter and Facebook because how will he reply to every individual who asks him a question?
Twitter is direct.
Twitter is direct, Facebook is direct. Modi's campaign used them very effectively. They can be used to sort of crowdsource. There are ways in which the Aam Aadmi Party has used it more effectively than the Congress has. So I think there's that mindset which hasn't changed. So I think
there's an arrogance?
I wouldn't say it's arrogance. I don't, it would be presumptuous of me to call it arrogance. I just think that they just didn't recognize how much the world has changed. And how, this tendency to believe that, the media doesn't matter. I think I wouldn't call it arrogance, but over the years there's been a contempt for the media, which our political class in general has shown towards the media. It's not new. They become more and more contemptuous of the media. I think the old world politicians were far better in dealing with media than many of the new politicians are. The new politicians have very thin skins. You criticize them, and they see you as the enemy, the adversary.
No, Rajdeep, I'll tell you. I was thrown out of a press conference by Rajdeep Sardesai. Indira Gandhi threw out an India Today reporter. They were just as thin-skinned.
I'm not so sure.
Well, that's in fact, Jawaharlal Nehru brought in the amendment to Article 19 when he was suddenly found himself being criticized. So
my experience has been that the old world politicians are more ready to share information than the new age politicians. That's been, the old world politicians were first of all 24/7, most of them. You could go to their house at 10:30, 11 in the house, and they'd still give you a cup of tea and share information. The new world politicians want to sort of do other things after 6 p.m. in the evening. So my experience has been the old, I mean, I've been very, critical in the past of a Lalu or a Sharad Pawar, and they've been more than happy after that to do interviews. Today, if you're critical, you suddenly become the enemy. The politician just closes his door to you the moment you criticize him. That's become the nature of our politics. Unfortunately, the relationship between the politician and the media person.
They usually recover. At least I found in the old days that you were critical of them, and for example, VP Singh, after the Mandal, what we showed on News Track, he refused to speak to us for a couple of months, and then he recovered. It seems to me that they do seem to recover. And throughout your book, the most absorbing part of your book is how your relationship with Narendra Modi evolves from a very good communication to the 2002 period, and then the blacking out of your NDTV, who you were working for at that time, and then how it has evolved since. There's a thread in the book which I think people will find extremely fascinating, and I think a lot of people on the trolls and presume that it's as if Narendra Modi hates you or blocks you off. I find it a very different sort of a relationship where it's like two swordsmen out with the, it's a duel, and he gives you more than you can give him, obviously, because you have to still keep your area of hope of access, which is the big tool that politicians have with us, that we can't really respond in kind. We have to take a lot because you want to keep your foot in the door for access, that one day he's going to talk to me.
Yeah, it's not just that. I think, it's just that it's interesting that in a way, a lot of Narendra Modi's political career for a while paralleled with what I was doing in my journalism, in the sense that
you started first in Maharashtra.
I started in Maharashtra, and I used to cover a lot of Maharashtra and Gujarat in those days, and Mr. Modi was in Gujarat in those days. So the first time I met him was during the Rath Yatra, which was the first big assignment in a sense that I had got as a journalist from Mumbai. Mr. Modi, I think, moved to Delhi in the mid-90s. I moved to Delhi in 94. Of course, after 2002, Mr. Modi went on a different trajectory, and and once he moved to Gujarat, I think that post 2002 things changed. But I think there was, in a sense, in the early years, a certain a certain relationship that a journalist often builds with a politician. And it was there. I knew Gujarati, I spoke Gujarati. My grandfather was a distinguished police officer whom Mr. Modi knew of.
Are you Gujarati?
I'm not. I'm Maharashtrian. I'm Maharashtrian. So, but I know a lot of I know Gujarat. I know Gujarati. So I think we were able to strike it off. I always was fascinated by his ability to constantly improve himself. I've always, I've observed Mr. Modi through good times and bad. And people tend to bracket people today. Journalists are bracketed as anti and pro. I'm a journalist. So when Modi has so naturally the relationship depends on has gone through its highs and lows, not on the basis of being pro or anti, but on the basis of events which have taken place. When Modi won the 95 election, or when the BJP won the Gujarat elections for the first time in 1995. I was among those who said Modi deserved a large part of the credit for that victory because he had shaped the BJP in those years. 2002 was a different story. I believe a chief minister must take more responsibility for what went wrong.
But on talking about 2002, when you compare the riots that have taken place earlier, albeit that in 1984 we didn't have the kind of news channels and the news coverage that we did, somehow the Gandhi family has really not been made accountable to 84 by the press in the same way that Narendra Modi has.
Madhu, I was a 19-year-old in 1984, observing what happened purely as a college student. I covered the 92-93 riots with great intensity. In fact, we wrote a book called When Bombay Burnt. That's the first time I sort of ventured into the world. Was a group of us from Times of India in those days wrote a book where we were pretty scathing of the government of the day, both the Congress NCP government and the Shiv Sena BJP, and the Shiv Sena in particular, which was seen to sort of be there as a defender of one community. And unfortunately, there was no television camera. So it hasn't stayed in public memory in the way that 2002 has. I wish people would see the kind of reporting we did in 92-93. Sharad Pawar threw me out of a press conference in 92-93 because of, we had questioned he was defense minister, and we'd questioned the delay in sending in the army. As I said, there was no television camera. I think sometimes the television camera brings an intensity and magnifies an event or gives a certain sort of, an immediacy to what is happening, which perhaps print cannot, which is why I can't look at 84 because I wasn't around then as a journalist, but 92-93 is a good sort of barometer to examine how the coverage of a riot, simply because there is a television camera in 2002, changes public perceptions.
When Modi called you during your coverage, at that time, as I said, you were working for NDTV, what did he say to you?
No, this was in connection with a particular incident that had taken place in a place called Anjar in Kutch, where apparently a little shrine or a sort of one of those roadside shrines had been desecrated, and a flash had gone on air. This flash had been taken from a news agency because we were in Ahmedabad. We didn't know what was happening in Anjar. This had obviously been taken as a flash from a news agency that some idol or some shrine had been desecrated. And I think Mr. Modi rang me up to tell me that, this was false. There was no temple, first of all, there. And, flashing something like this could aggravate the situation, could be inflammatory.
I think that's a fair thing to do.
That was a fair thing to do. We removed it. I mean, as I said, but I think, I've tried to be as non-judgmental in this book as possible. I have tried to keep away my own sense of what was right and what was wrong, tried to be as non-judgmental. But it is true that, Mr. Modi called me at the time, and even though we took it off, I think he eventually said, we're yanking the channel off.
And he called you a second time?
I don't recall him calling me a second time. What I do recall is I remember the same evening or the evening after, he gave me 2 interviews. The first interview we did was in the circuit house, and the tape got chewed.
Yeah.
So I had to ring him up again and then go back to meet him in Gandhinagar that same night. So he gave me 2 interviews, ironically, in the space of few hours.
But on the way out, you got beaten up by a crowd.
I didn't get beaten up.
Your cameraman.
We were stopped on the highway, and we were questioned about our religious identity. We were not beaten up, but our car windshield was smashed by pickaxes, and it was obviously an angry and furious mob, which was just a couple of kilometers away from where the Chief Minister's residence is, at around midnight on the Gandhinagar highway. So, I mean, that it was a pretty shaking, it shook us up a bit, but I think, at the end of the day, it's just one of life's experiences.
But do you think we in the media have been fair in the sense of other riots that have taken place? Recent one, say, is in Muzaffarnagar. Have we laid the blame as squarely to people in power as we did with Narendra Modi in 2002? It seems that 2002 has become such an when you look at, I'm such an old journalist and have been seen through so many riots, that I have not seen the equality of placing the blame, forget 84, even other riots in other cities, of placing the blame on the administration and the Chief Minister as we did with Modi. Why is that so, you think?
Look, again, I am comparing 92-93 with 2002. I actually deposed in front of the Sri Krishna Commission. For 3 days I deposed, giving it was a detailed deposition. So I can claim that the 2 major riots that I covered as a foot soldier journalist were covered with intensity, in the sense of trying to find and it's about accountability.
Yeah.
When more than 1,000 people die, or somebody has to be held accountable. And that was the sole purpose of whatever I did. I have never, believed in sort of anything beyond that. My premier task while coverage, both in 92, 93 and 2002, was in the belief that justice is, we have to stand with the victim. And therefore, that's the job of a journalist, to ensure a sense of justice. As I said,
sometimes it's a question who the victim is.
Sure, but let's be, yes, but I was looking at what I was covering post Godhra. So where it was obvious that, who was the victim, who were by and large the victims of what happened in post Godhra. Muzaffarnagar.
But 290 Hindus also died in Godhra.
That's right. Killed
by the police. And that has not been highlighted either by the Modi government, because it does not really balance out to the image that...
No, look, that's not true. These figures have been mentioned. These figures have come out. The Gujarat government has mentioned it. Naturally, in a situation of the kind, I mean, let's be honest. I believe 84 was not a riot. 84 was a pogrom, purely by numbers. It was a one-sided attack on a community.
And 2002?
2002 was a riot in which one community suffered disproportionately to the other, by a large scale. I mean, there was a terrible incident that happened in Godhra, and then there was the backlash to it. I mean, that's really the narrative. Now, you could...
When you spoke about what Modi said, a chain of action and reaction is going on, you said that, and I sense a sort of cynicism when it's repeated, that he said, he claimed what he would later repeat in another interview to Zee News, is that a chain of reaction and action is going on. We want neither action nor reaction.
Yes,
the second part, you thought, that you believe that he added it on later?
No. To be fair to him, he was trying to explain a statement which had appeared in the Times of India that morning about Newton's law being used by Modi, action, reaction. But when he spoke to me and later on to Zee, he did say, na kriya honi chahiye, na pratikriya. So I'm trying to be fair to him.
So the media was not fair to him then?
Look, I believe that there was...
By cutting off the second part?
That you should ask the Times of India reporter who wrote that story. I have never used the words action and reaction for Modi at all. In fact, you see, that's my worry about it. What happens is, because a reporter is on the front line on television, covering a story, he becomes the face of the story. And anything that goes on around it, 360 degrees, that reporter is blamed for it, good or bad.
Not really. I mean,
that tends to happen. That tends to happen, because please tell me, does anyone remember the print reporters who wrote 2000, who documented 2002? Give me their names today, 12 years later.
I think the thing is that with television it's more immediate, and the reaction from the public would also be immediate, whereas the newspaper will come out the next morning. So the reaction that could possibly, the backlash that could happen would be delayed.
Yeah, but but there were some very fine print journalists who wrote some very strong stories.
Siddharth Bharadwaj.
No, I'm not sure Siddharth was there in 2002 in Gujarat, but there were many others from Indian Express who wrote very, very powerful stories, and even from the Times of India. And do you know the names? We don't know the names, because that's what I said. The camera image stays in the mind. So, this reporter was on the front line in covering the riots, so that reporter gets identified with that. It's like, a Barkha Dutt was in Kargil. I'm sure there were print reporters there as well. But Barkha's image sticks with Kargil. It could well happen that there is some other big story in the same way which has broken over the years.
You also said, you've written about that period, that you did a lot of self-censorship. You had footage which you did not show, of charred bodies and cars and homes destroyed and people burnt and all that. In that sense, a journalist uses his own judgment. But when you do your piece to camera and you mention communities, which is, I think, what Narendra Modi was objecting to in your coverage, please don't give locations and please don't name the communities, which he said was not followed by NDTV, and then he blacked them out.
That's, that's a self-censorship, I believe, exists certainly in terms of visuals and the depiction of visuals. But you're in a riot situation. Let's be honest, it was, there are certain things perhaps that you would do differently on hindsight. But at that moment, you're caught in a violent situation. You are in real-time television in a way. And therefore, you might be showing, you might portray events as you see them. But should you name communities? Should you not name communities? I'm not sure whether the old style, someone from one community stabbed someone from the other, makes a difference. And let's be honest, those who say the media was responsible for the riots are also shooting the messenger. The fact was, by the time the media got there, and in fact, if you see, most of us were not even there in a Gulbarg society and all when the violence took place.
No, I think
we reached these places after the violence had taken place.
I think the reaction,
so this myth has been created that the media fanned the flames of violence.
No, I think more the anger against the media is that why do you go after Narendra Modi when other riots have taken place all over the country and nobody went after the Congress or SP, BSP, whoever's in power. Nobody has gone after the chief minister like the media went after Narendra Modi.
I think that again, I'm going to speak for myself. In 92, 93, we were constantly questioning the Congress NCP government. We were constantly questioning the police authorities in Mumbai. It was sustained coverage. That's the one I covered. Muzaffarnagar, I've seen constant questioning of Akhilesh Yadav in those 4 months after Muzaffarnagar happened. Television, I had Shivpal Yadav walk away from my program because of our questioning on Muzaffarnagar. So it's not as if we haven't questioned. I mean, and I hate this comparison that is done between riots. I think any form of violence is condemnable, and I think journalists have to have to show the same passion while covering it. Whenever you get an opportunity to cover an incident where you want to hold those in power accountable, you cover it with passion. Now you could argue, have we stuck on Gujarat? That may be true of activists. As a journalist, for me, it was a big story that I covered. And I believe now we are in 2014, and this book is about 2014. In fact, a lot of people who've read it are saying, a friend of mine asked me, why isn't there more about 2002?
Well, there's enough, I think. Now,
and I kept saying, this is about 2014.
Now, there's a very interesting passage over here where you've written, what is probably true is that in February 2002, the real boss of Gujarat was not Modi, but the VHP General Secretary, Praveen Tagodia. If there was a ringmaster for the 2002 riots, it was Tagodia. All right? And then, interestingly enough, you write, several ministers were beholden to him and the street carders were his loyalists. At the time, maybe even Modi feared him.
Yes.
How did you come to that?
This is what has been told to me by several people who are close to the Gujarat government. I used to cover, as I said, Gujarat pretty exhaustively in those years, and a number of ministers, senior bureaucrats, have told me that Togadia was the one who was running the show, because I asked them, then why didn't Mr. Modi step in? And they said, remember, Mr. Modi was chief minister at the time for barely 4 or 5 months. He'd just come. In fact, he'd won his by-election in Rajkot just days before. While Togadia and the VHP were well entrenched. And, that's how they saw it. So I'm reflecting in that sense what they, in a sense, their explanation for what had happened.
Today, how do you read it? The relationship between Narendra Modi, the VHP and the RSS?
It's one of the interesting aspects that we haven't really quite focused upon over these years, which is that Modi tried to smash Togadia. By 2007-8, Togadia was finished. And I'm wondering whether, I think it was strategic. Because I think Mr. Modi recognized the importance that he had to, that he, in a sense, I think felt that he didn't need the VHP anymore by 2007. There was enough self-confidence that he was now fully in charge of Gujarat. And he likes to be in charge, whether it's in Gujarat or whether it's in Delhi. Will he do the same in Delhi to the RSS? I don't think so. The relationship between the RSS and Modi, RSS and BJP is a very different one. So I think that relationship will be interesting to watch, but the balance of that, of maintaining that critical balance will be key to Modi. To what extent is he willing to allow, for example, the RSS to decide on what he believes is his executive space? I think he holds his executive space very dearly. He didn't concede to Togadia by 2007 an inch of space. Would he do the same to a Mohan Rao Bhagwat in Delhi? I think that's going to be one of the interesting aspects of the evolution of the Modi prime ministership in the next 5 to 10 years.
But in your book, it becomes clear, particularly in the campaign in Banaras, that in Varanasi, that the VHP cadres and RSS cadres played a very
absolutely
powerful role on the ground in getting the votes out there for Narendra Modi.
In fact, one of the lesser known stories again of this election is the role of the RSS. And I remember an RSS leader who I quote in the book, who's really Amit Shah's right-hand man, Sushil Bansal, who says that, there was actually, the RSS was far more involved in this than any elections in 77. 77 also they were part of, in a sense, Jaiprakash Narayan's sort of total revolution movement, and they joined, the Janata Party. In 91 there was the Rath Yatra, so there was a reason for them to join in. Here this time there was a junoon which was even more than that. It was almost like a do or die battle for the RSS. They were despondent after 2009, they were being written off. So I think this was seen by many RSS cadres as their last chance, and Mr. Modi and Amit Shah, to their great credit, were able to galvanize the energies of the RSS in this election. I mean, that made a huge difference, particularly in Uttar Pradesh, because on the other side, the Samajwadi Party and the BSP, more surprisingly, and even the Congress certainly, just didn't have that energy to match these guys.
And they didn't take anything for granted, as you wrote in your book, that even in the last moment when Amit Shah realized there might be some overconfidence and people are getting lackadaisical, he called them in and said...
And the incredible story is their advertising campaign.
Yes.
Just look at the way they...
Amazing story.
That
your
story of that...
goes into that detail.
I go into great detail about the way they did the advertising campaign for Amethi, then one for Varanasi. I mean, that
overnight,
level,
taking footage, yeah.
And there's this crazy story
of passion. If you're doing
junoon.
If you're working like that.
That's right. The word that they kept using to me was junoon. That they felt a certain sense that this was a do or die
Why
battle.
did the Rahul Gandhi team not have it?
They just didn't have it. I think politics today is 24/7. It is not, you can't switch on and off in Indian politics anymore. I think Narendra Modi is a good example of that. I think Mamata Banerjee is a good example of that. These are 24/7 politicians. 2 in the morning, they will, if there's something, if there's a mistake on your ticker, I mentioned that with Mamata, she will ring me up at 2 in the morning saying your ticker this information is wrong. Now that level of involvement in politics comes from within. So I can't explain why the Congress didn't do it. The Congress has to ask itself that are they not, do they not have that desire left to win elections? The elections now have to be fought like a battle.
Later on in the book, now moving away from that, you've written about Reliance investing in Network 18. And you have said that, to be fair, Reliance had not interfered in the editorial content of the channels. You have written that they were truly, as our promoter Raghav Bell kept it, reassuring us, being kept at an arm's length. However, 2014 election campaign changed all that. And so then there was this, why do we need to show everything Kejriwal does? And there was this where you were told that it wasn't a great idea to end the Google Hangout. Can you describe to us what happened at the Google Hangout?
No, the Google Hangout, look, this was a partnership with Google. And in fact, we did hangouts with several leaders. We just wrote to everyone. We wrote to Mr. Modi, we wrote to Rahul Gandhi, we wrote to every leader.
But you said that spurred your resignation. So what exactly happened?
No, that didn't spur my resignation.
You've written it?
Yeah, no, what it did is it's perhaps set off a chain of events that eventually led to my resignation, in terms of the fact that I think that Google Hangout, because it featured Kejriwal, was seen by whoever as an act of defiance, which it wasn't. It was simply, he was being covered like any other politician. There was a lot of interest in him, as there was in others. We wrote to everyone. Google wrote to about 25 people. He agreed. And on the morning of the Google Hangout, or the afternoon of the Google Hangout, I was told that we should try not to carry it because it wouldn't be seen as kosher. To do it. And I said, we've been promoting it since morning. He's coming now in the next half an hour to our offices in the Google office in Connaught Place. I can't tell him to go. And look, if he says anything which is mildly defamatory, we will excise it. I mean, follow the rules of journalism and excise it and edit it out. But you can't tell me that don't call this individual, let's not have him. And I think that, because I think at the time there was this sense that Kejriwal was taking on
Modi.
Modi was taking on Reliance, was saying things which could sort of be potentially defamatory. I think the lawyers were more worried about what this would involve. My belief was we were trying to cover an election. He was one of several leaders. And, I think we need to make a distinction between the coverage of Kejriwal during the Delhi Assembly elections, where I think he did get disproportionate coverage and benefited from the proximity to the television news headquarters, and the coverage of Kejriwal during the general elections, where he was just another leader. And he was just one Google Hangout. I keep maintaining he was one Google. We did Omar Abdullah, we did several others. We did Jairam Ramesh. We did about 10 Google Hangouts. So Shivraj Singh Chauhan.
But you were one of the initial promoters, and I presume you still have equity there, or they bought it.
I still have some equity left, but I haven't sold a single share over the years. I don't know how to deal with, money has never been my strong suit, and I have. Raghav is the promoter. I mean, I had a equity stock option. I had sort of when I joined, so I have stock options. Which I still retain, but. Look, I am basically a journalist. So from a journalist instinct, I was only thinking of a story.
No, but how does it work out that you resign from a place, join another? How does it work with Arun Puri that you still have stock options in TV18?
No, those are my shares. Those are my shares in the
So
in
that's
the market.
acceptable?
Those are shares in the market.
In another news organization?
That's okay. That's my stock. It has nothing to do with anything else.
They didn't ask you to sell it when you resigned?
No, that is an option I retain for. When to sell shares is entirely up to you, depending on market conditions.
Can you describe a little bit exactly the events that happened that you said I am going to invite Kejriwal and this is going to go on, and you carried on with the interview with the Google Hangout? Then what was the fallout? Were there lawyers or Ambani himself or his
No, to be fair,
cronies?
there was no Ambani himself, but we got a legal notice to say that that we've served a restraining order on you, and
so the owner of the news organization sends a legal notice to its own employee. That's rather ironical.
That's the way I see it. Is that, look, at the end of the day, the interview went on air, and if there was anything which was said which was seen to be defamatory, it was removed. There were a couple of lines, I think, which were removed. But as I said, I was honest to my profession. I have grown up to be a journalist, and I've been very fortunate that whether at the Times of India in the late 80s and early 90s, whether it was at NDTV and whether it was with Raghav at Network 18, I was given a lot of freedom, and I value that. Today with Arun and TV Today, I value the idea that you have people who have a certain commitment to journalism. Journalism is a very different profession to most others in that sense. There is this almost you can't capture things like freedom and credibility.
It's intangibles, and also
they're intangibles.
It's a public service.
It's a public,
which, when business houses come into it, and you're looking at the bottom line and self-promotions, as we saw in this hospital inauguration, it was like a home movie.
Well, at the same time, let's be clear. Corporates across the world do invest in the media. I mean, GE had a huge investment in NBC. I think all you need is to set clear and transparent rules and create some kind of a wall between the corporate and the newsroom. If you do that, I would actually welcome corporates who come in and invest in the media if that is used then for better news gathering. I mean, I think.
But that's not happened at TV18, clearly.
I will not comment on what is happening or not happening at TV18 because I'm emotionally attached still to the place. I have deep emotions.
You are emotionally attached.
Yes, I have deep emotions with a place that you helped set up. I mean, why would I not?
And so it must have been really traumatic for you to leave.
It has been extremely traumatic. I have gone through the most difficult 5 months of my life, and in a way this book was therapeutic. This book was my way of getting over the trauma of leaving a place which you had set up with a lot of care and a lot of effort. And I poured it all, I think, into the book because I thought I I had a 4-5 month window where I could be away from a 24/7 newsroom, because books can't be written while you're in a 24/7 newsroom. These were 5 months where I wanted to put my effort into it, because I also thought, honestly, that I think that it's important to sometimes step back and write about events that you've been so close to over 20. It's almost like a chapter in my life. 90s.
So did you, when you took the decision to resign, who did you give your letter to?